introduce you to myself. I'm Steph. I'm one of the data specialists here at ClinEpiDB. And so you've got to spend the beginning part of this day learning how to play with our website. But what happens once you've realized that you've actually want to use the data that is supplied? So we're going to talk about some study accessibility and how to actually go through and download the data. Okay. So I know in our group, people have already noticed that studies have different levels of accessibility, and those permissions determine what functionality you're allowed to access. Some of our studies are public, which means that it's very easy. You can access, the study page, the aggregate data, and you can even go in and download the data itself. Some studies are controlled, and as you can see, you would have to submit a data access request, and from there, you'll immediately be allowed to access the data. And then a lot of our studies are protected, where your data access request actually has to be approved by the study team. When you do try to download data that you do not have permission to download, you'll be asked to submit a data access request. It's a basic web form that asks, what is your purpose for the data? Have you contacted or talked to the study team? Your hypothesis or research question, how you plan to analyze the data, and do you have any plans for dissemination of your results? Ooh, sorry. Also, just so you know, when you have been granted access to the data set, a summary of your request will be publicly displayed on the study page in hopes to show others other questions that people are asking around these data sets, in hopes to provide collaboration between different researchers. So, you want to download your data. There's two different ways you can download data from ClinEpiDB. One is you can download all the data in a data set, and this is accessible by study card and the study page results table. You can also download your resulting searches off of the results page. So let's download the data off the data in the data set. Okay. So if you look at on the main page on the data set cards, you can see that right here, there's a download data button. You can also access that same web page from the study page itself, right there. And it will lead you to this page where you'll have a bunch of text files. And you'll want to go through and click on each file to download each version of the data sets. So if you go back and you notice that there are different levels of data files available to you for households, observations, participants, samples. And then there's one that doesn't have an underscore, and that is going to be a combination of all the data in the study. So what do these different things mean? So basically, it makes your data so for community level observations, you're going to have one row per observation. And so basically each one of these files creates the structure for you. Some files, if they're longitudinal, will have multiple rows per each observation. And as above, we have key identifiers that help you identify which are unique observations. So for community ID, for example, if it's not a longitudinal study, you're just going to have a community ID. If you have a longitudinal study, you're going to also have a community plus an observational ID so that you have a unique identifier for each row of your data file. So this is an example of how it would look. So in this isomer cross-sectional study, it is not a longitudinal study, so you have one row per household, where down here in the cohort study, as you can see, you have one row per enrollment arm. So what makes us different than just a data repository? One of the places where we spend a lot of time and effort is in our curation and annotation of all incoming data sets that come our way. We take the variables and code books and map them to existing ontologies. Oftentimes, you look at data sets and one person will call one feature one variable name and in another data set another name. So how do you compare those things together? And so what we do is we use ontology so that we can link these concepts together from one data set to the next. And this gives us a common framework that we can work from. It also enables interoperability between all the different data sets from the. So when you go to the ontology metadata file, it's not actually the data from the study itself. It is all the metadata surrounding the variables that you will find in the data sets. Okay, now let's go move on to downloading your results from your searches that you perform. So you go in and you've performed a search using the search wizard, and you have some results that you're really interested in. What you can do now is go to download, and you can decide which version of the format you want. So, we have basically, tab or comma delimited, also a standard JSON. You can also get one that has all observations or one that you can make a custom table. So custom table is nice because you can specify which columns you want. So you can go in, choose the report you'd like, and then choose the actual columns that you're looking at specifically. That way you're not getting bombarded with hundreds of variables. And so again, households are going to be one row per household observation. And these are just things to be aware of when you're downloading your data, because it's just slightly structured differently than sometimes how you might think your file should be. And so instead, so say you download the sample data, right? And you want to look at it per participant. Your sample that you download is going to be one per sample, not one per participant. I guess I should stop and ask if there's any questions. Sorry. Okay. So often people have some questions that, tend to be the same between everyone. And so we just wanted to show you some frequently asked questions. You can access some the FAQs off our website under About FAQ. And here you'll see some just general questions. How do I use it? How do I cite it? Can I analyze my own data? How do I submit? Is ClinEpi a data repository, etc.? So if you want to cite ClinEpi, here is our citation. And Also, if you want to share data by ClinEpi, do you have to include your data sharing in an IRB proposal? And the answer is yes. If you tend to make data available, it's important to include that information in your consent forms. And finally, how do you submit data to us? To start, you should contact us. Use the contact link and talk to our team about having your data loaded into ClinEpi. Just give us a brief background about what your data and your study is about, and we will set up a meeting and try to talk to you whether or not how we could go about including that data in our website. So that's the end of my slides. I think we're going to stop sharing. We are going to have David is going to finish this up and conclude the talk.
Thanks very much, Steph. And any questions from anyone else that they'd like to raise? As I indicated in our breakout group, and I trust the rest of you recognize already, this project is a little bit different than a scientific research project because well, I'm interested in making sure that the research that we do in my laboratory has broader impact. In this particular case, the ClinEpi project is not a research project. It's a tool to use, and like any tool, it's only as useful as people find it. So we definitely want to hear from you about what works, what doesn't, what you find confusing, what you'd like to be able to do better. You're always welcome to do that by clicking on the Contact Us link, but you're also, and that includes or answering or entering comments into the chat now. And we're happy to run meetings with your research or field group at any time. Any other specific questions that people would like to raise? This goes for folks on the ClinEpi team as well. I do want to also touch on a couple of points about what's coming with ClinEpi and some issues about sharing data and being able to analyze your own data.
Hello?
Yes, hello, Modeste.
Yes. Yes. I just wanted to find out who is allowed to make a repository of the data on ClinEpi.
Yeah, so let me address this issue about where data comes from. There's a wide range of potential data, and there's several strategies that we've taken to upload to make these data sets available. The primary value is probably for very large underreported studies like, for example, the MALI-D study is one that we took a look at today that includes millions of data points from multiple studies at places around the globe. And while the MALI-D project has yielded hundreds of publications, there's a vast amount of work that can be done in that study that others could make use of. And the goal is to try to make that available. So for such large studies, we've been approached by the Gates Foundation to support the development of ontologies to be able to load that data. You may have data that you work on that you would be interested in examining or sharing or making publicly, sharing with your collaborators or making publicly available on a site like ClinEpiDB. And there are several strategies for doing that. Let me give you some examples about how this works, which also relates to cost. So loading the data from the MALI-D project was probably $1 million initiative. And clearly that's something that's not sustainable for projects that don't cost $1 million. The MALI-D study in aggregate probably consumed closer to $100 million. So it makes sense to make sure that that data is available. Part of the reason why that cost was so expensive is it took a great deal of time to capture and properly represent the experimental metadata in a formal ontological framework so that it could be made sense of even after the disbanding of the project team. And once that has been done for many thousands of variables, related studies, such as other enteric disease studies, can be loaded much more cheaply and inexpensively and rapidly, but it's still on the order of $100,000 worth of effort to properly map and load and configure and QC the data. Our goal is to reduce the cost of that by an order of magnitude, and we may or may not reach that point, and it's unlikely that it will become dramatically cheaper. And so what that means is that if you have a study that you would like to see represented, that requires that's something that has to meet with the needs of the various stakeholders, including the Gates Foundation, but also the NIH and the Wellcome Trust and others, who would like to see that loaded. So many of the data sets that have been loaded, some of those that we have looked at and there now, the foundation has been happy to support the loading of, even though they were not their studies. That still leaves us with the question of how do you load data? How do you analyze your own data? If it does not meet those criteria, and if and particularly if, for example, it is something that you're not ready or willing to share. And for that, we have been trying to develop a project that we informally call a DIY epidemiology platform that allows users like yourself to ignore the ontology's structure data the way you normally would in your data dictionary, provide us with a simply configured tab delimited format file with an additional description of the variables, allowing you to upload that and analyze the data in a common platform in a cloud-based system, which we can support the cost of. So we hope to be able to make that functionality available to users worldwide without cost, sometime within the next year or so. That would provide a common platform to analyze your own data, which most of you probably don't need. All of you have been involved in generating or analyzing data, and you don't need us to be able to graph your data. If you don't have a data analysis plan, you won't be supported for your project. But by having a common platform, it makes it relatively easy for you to share your data with others, other collaborators, a bright student working in the field who perhaps doesn't have the command of scripting or the data manager, your collaborators elsewhere around the world, journal editors, study reviewers, and so on. So there's a wide range of opportunities that we'd like to make, and I'll close by just saying that our goal is to try to make epidemiological data as fairly accessible as has been the case for genomic data over the past generation. We now take it for granted that data from the Human Genome Project, for example, is publicly accessible, but that was not always the case. A generation ago was a very anxious time about data control, access of data, with many concerns about possible misuse of data, including ethical misuse and including inappropriate recognition of those who'd worked long and hard to make the data available. We've come through that in quite a successful way, in ways that we're seeing with developments in the COVID pandemic and so many other areas. And we look forward to seeing that day come for epidemiological data as well. Does that begin to answer some of your questions, Modest?
Yeah, that's quite detailed. Thank you very much. I do understand. I just wanted to make a follow-up to that. For example, in these mixed methods research, how does this work with this platform?
So that's a good question. It's a common question that we receive. There are many there are many projects that seek to carry out meta-analyses or to aggregate data across studies, and that's of course both important, but also fraught with peril of mixing apples and oranges and not recognizing that you've done so. So to a first approximate, so everything that is loaded in ClinEpiDB is mapped to a formal ontology so that we can be sure that what you're calling a fever for a study in India and a study in Uganda is the same thing, or what you mean by diarrhea or the duration of diarrhea is similar. And we try to provide access to the raw data insofar as possible. One of the exercises that you may or may not have gotten to looked at, for example, allowed you to look, for example, at a detailed side-by-side comparison of sensitivity assays by PCR or microbiome or bacteriological assay for diarrheal pathogens. So our goal is to try to facilitate the exploration across studies, but not to actually integrate those data. And we're working on a variety of approaches to try to summarize these results in ways that are useful. The dream here is that much as Netflix might tell you, based on the movies that you have wanted to watch, you might be interested in these other movies. In my experience, not very effectively. We would like to be able to say, it looks like you're interested in, it looks like you're interested in the uptake and efficacy of BedNet distribution in Uganda. You may be interested in the following studies to look at what happens in DRC or Brazil or India. I am cognizant of the time. We are up we're 2 minutes past the scheduled end of this workshop. As you'll note from the schedule, we have an optional session that's dedicated from 2 to 3. We have several staff members on the call who are available to answer specific questions, look at specific things online, or talk about data sets afterwards. But what I'd like to do is, unless there are any final words from folks on the ClinEpi team, I'd like to close out this session, give people who signed up for 4 hours a chance to log off. And those of you who have other questions and would like to remain on, please do so. And we can either talk about that as a group or ask Sam to send us off to breakout rooms where we can discuss more privately.